Hey guys, it's Jenny again. Back for another vlog. I just wanted to come back and do kind of like part two of this. If you didn't watch my last video, go back on my page and you should see it's the only other video I have up. So I just wanted to kind of do like part two, like after Addison was born, kind of like what we went through with that. So I guess I'll just get started. She was born on November 20th, 2017, which was a Monday. We went home on Wednesday. So in between that, we were having trouble getting, like with breastfeeding, getting her to latch a bit. We couldn't figure out why. They kept saying that she had like her jaw was like kind of pushed in, and that she had a high arch in her palate. But it was causing me a lot of pain and just a lot of struggles getting her to latch. But I kept working through it. Came home Wednesday, kept working through it, and we came home the day before Thanksgiving. But we kept working through it. I was literally like half the time crying because it hurt so bad. It was horrible, but it was such a wonderful experience. Like, even though it was painful, like it was just like I felt that connection with her and all that. So I did get to experience that at least for a while. I ended up, to kind of give myself a little break, I think that Sunday I started pumping a little. I was making so much milk and she wasn't able to like drain me all the way, so it was like just getting really painful. It was like getting engorged and stuff. So I would pump like not much, like I would only pump like once or twice a day at first, but that night, so like a week after she was born, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. She would go to the nurse, and I nursed her, and she felt kind of warm, and we were kind of checking her temperature anyway because the hospital on the papers, it said that we should, if she had a fever of 100.4 or higher, that we had to bring her to the emergency room. So we checked her temperature and it was 100.7. So I called her pediatrician, yes, at 4 o'clock in the morning. And she called me back and, she said, yes, go to the emergency room. She suggested that we go to Children's Hospital because that was the best place to take her for a baby. It was the best place to bring her. So that's where we brought her. They explained that they would have to run every test that they had to, like every single test that could be what it is, like anything that caused a fever. So they did blood work, and they explained that they had to do a spinal tap, which as a mom, that was the scariest thing. Like, them saying they had to give my 1-week-old baby a spinal tap was terrifying. But anyways, they did all that. They had to kick us out of the room for the spinal tap because it's like a sterile procedure, which we later learned a lot more about sterile procedures. But so they asked us to wait out in the waiting room, and then they came and got us. The whole time we were in the waiting room, it was so scary. Like, I was just sitting there crying because I couldn't imagine how painful that was. Like, I had just had my epidural, and that was painful. So I couldn't imagine like a 1-week-old baby like having to get a needle jammed in their spine, But by the time we came back, she wasn't even crying anymore. Like, she was fine. But I just held her and held her. At some point, they came in and did an IV. It took 3 tries. So they stuck my baby 3 times trying to get an IV after they had already done a spinal tap. They ended up admitting us. So they admitted her into the room upstairs. And after that, at some point, it was pretty quickly, they came back and told us that she had RSV, which at the time I really didn't even know what that was. I started doing some research along with asking the doctors and nurses kind of like what it was. So they told us that she had that, but they still would have to keep her because they needed to see if it was anything else as well, because a lot of times when babies are that young that they could have more things or whatever. So they just wanted to make sure that that's what it was. And the test for the spinal tap took 3 days to do. So they explained to us that we would be here for a minimum of 3 days, that we would be there. So we prepared to stay there 3 days. I got to see the lactation consultant there, which she was really helpful. She was the first person that actually sat down and watched me pump, watched me nurse and all that. And she looked in Addison's mouth and found out that she had actually had a lip tie. And that was more likely what was causing all the pain with nursing and everything. And she explained, like, we can get it clipped or something and all that. So we did talk to her pediatrician later about that, and she agreed that she would do the clip. We just had to get it, like, approved by the insurance and everything. Sorry, that was my dog barking. She barks all the time. But anyways, we didn't really have time to do that. We went home after the 3 weeks. At that point, I was still kind of trying, after the 3 days, I was kind of still trying to nurse, but I was pumping a lot too because it was just so painful, and it was less painful with pumping. And the lactation consultant had actually watched me pump and, like, was able to tell me, like, I wasn't using the right size flange. And that's why pumping even hurt at that point. But once I was using the right size flange, it didn't hurt anymore. So, I ended up coming home. We came home. I was pumping a lot. I was breastfeeding a lot. Mostly breastfeeding though still. I was still nursing. So we ended up going to, it was the next Monday. Yeah, it was the same thing. Like, we went in Monday, left Wednesday, and then the next Monday we started noticing that she was still having fever, for one thing. And we noticed that she had a weird blister looking bump on her head. So that's what I noticed first. And then I noticed that she had them, like, in her mouth as well, like on her tongue. And we actually noticed the ones on her tongue while we were still at Children's, like, that Wednesday. And we asked the nurse, and the nurse said it just looked like from milk. Because at the time it looked a lot different. It didn't really look like a blister. It just was, like, white on her tongue. After we noticed all that, I noticed that I had something that looked a lot like what was on her head, on my hand and on my arm. So we ended up, since she was still running fevers too, we called her doctor, and she said, okay, let's take a look and we'll see, what it looked like. And I think we had to go in anyway, for, like, her first doctor's appointment or whatever. Well, it was her second doctor's appointment, but her first appointment with Dr. Bigger, who's her pediatrician. So we went in, and she looked, and she's like, that doesn't look like milk at all. That's definitely blisters. And she could see a lot more of it than we could, because, like, we didn't look, like, down her throat and everything. And they were, like, on her tongue, on her, like, the inside of her cheeks and stuff. And I showed her, like, my hands and my arm, and we showed her head, obviously, too. And so she was like, I kind of am worried that this is hand, foot, and mouth. So what I want y'all to do is go to Children's again in the ER and have them check for hand, foot, and mouth. She suggested we go straight there. We ended up not going straight there because, like, we didn't have any clothes or anything, and we just knew they were going to keep us at least a couple of days. So we went home and got, like, clothes and stuff, and then we went there. And we also got more milk in case I wasn't able to nurse or anything. So we went back to the hospital. I brought my pump this time too, because the pump in the hospital I did not like. I know everybody raves about hospital pumps and how awesome they were. I didn't like it. I rathered my pump that I had home. So we got all that, and we go back to Children's Hospital in the ER. They did blood work, and they popped one of the blisters in her mouth and sent that for testing too. But they explained once again that it would take several days to get the results. So they said that a lot of times, like, the dermatologists and stuff, like, for adults testing could be faster than what they can get. So they suggested me to go to my gynecologist, because I also was, like, my breasts were, like, really, like, bad looking because of the nursing, and it turned out that it was the same thing. Like, it was from her mouth. She spread it from her mouth to my breast. But so I went to the gynecologist. The gynecologist had no idea what it was. So I went to the dermatologist, and they did a biopsy on my arm, of the one on my arm. And I think it was, like, the next day they called back, and they said that it was herpes simplex virus. So we told the nurses that we needed to speak to the doctors and told them what it was on me. And they said that it was a pretty good chance that that's what's on me and it looks the same, that it was probably the same thing that was on her, and explained that we needed to do a spinal tap again. She's only 2 weeks old at this point and had to have another spinal tap. I cried and cried because I could not believe that, we had to have her have this again, and she was only 2 weeks old. They said that automatically they said that since this is herpes simplex virus, if it is still for her, we would have to stay a minimum of 14 days if she just has it, the blisters, on IV antivirals called, I can't even think of the name of it right now, acyclovir. So, and then if it went into her spinal cord, we'd have to stay for 21 days. Yeah, 21 days. To make sure it was at her spine, and then they would retest her spinal tap after that and make sure that it was out. So they did the spinal tap and they came back, I think the next day or something, and said that it had grown and it was in her spinal cord, unfortunately. Babies die from HSV1. When they're that young, it's very dangerous and they can die, and a lot of babies have died. Especially once it gets in their spinal cord, it can affect all their organs and things like that. So they did blood work to check all her different organs and stuff. At one point her liver was showing a bad result because they said from the acyclovir, with her being so young, that the medicine could affect it. So, but they said that the liver is a healing organ and it can heal itself. So we didn't really have to worry. Back up to the first night there, her IV had failed within the first night because they started the acyclovir just in case it was that, because we saw an infectious disease doctor that first night, and he explained that it very well could be herpes simplex virus, so we would treat for the worst thing. That way, if it was that, we already had a few days of treatment before, that the test result came back. We would already have a few days of treatment under her belt. So thankfully they had started that already, but the first night the IV had failed. We kept it kept beeping and stuff, and the nurse would come in and fix it. Well, they ended up realizing it had failed, so they had to take it out and they were gonna have to do another IV. This nurse came in there for an hour trying to get an IV on her and couldn't get it. Her screaming the whole time. It was terrible. She screamed the entire time because, they're poking at her, of course. So she said, okay, I'm not trying anymore. I'm going to get the transport doctors, which is the transport nurses, which is the nurses that go out on the helicopters and stuff, and they pick up patients to transport them. So they're way better at it, and they have this light that they can use to shine and see where the veins are and stuff. So they came in and they got it within one try. So after that, and there at that point I didn't know that I could say don't do it anymore. So after that, every time they had to do an IV, because her IV failed multiple times, I would ask them to automatically send out transport. So every time transport came. So her IV failed. She had 10 different IVs before they finally decided to try a more permanent IV. They looked for a PICC line, to do a PICC line, but they really couldn't find any good enough veins to do it because they had already blown so many veins. So they ended up doing one that's called a central line, which is a line where they place in your neck and it goes straight into your heart. Not into your heart, but right outside your heart. So they did that one, and that one she had to be put to sleep. So it was a 45-minute procedure because it only takes a few minutes, but with the getting her in, putting her to sleep, and then doing it, and then waking her up, recovery and all that. So she couldn't eat for like 6 hours before that, so that was rough because she was just crying the whole time, because not the whole time, but when she was hungry she started crying because she was hungry and she wanted to eat, but she couldn't eat. And I wasn't able to nurse her because they suspected that I had the herpes simplex virus on my breast, so I wasn't able to nurse her, so I was pumping and she was getting formula, which she really didn't react well to the formula. Like, she kept getting constipated. Probably over the course of the time that we were there, she was constipated like 3 times. But she always ended up going on her own. We didn't have to do the suppositories or anything. It made her skin break out really badly. She had red like acne, like baby acne, and the second she was back on breast milk, it went away. So it was obviously from the formula. But anyways, so they did the central line, and that was supposed to be a permanent IV. Notice I said supposed to be, because the next week, whenever they went in and they did the cleaning, because they have to clean it once a week, when they did that, it broke, so it wasn't permanent for her. So they did a PICC line. They came in to do the PICC line. That took like an hour and a half because they couldn't get the vein, and she was just crying and crying and crying. They ended up getting it, but it took a really long time. Actually, when the nurse, which was our favorite nurse, her name was Caroline, whenever the nurse came back in to let us know that they were done, she told us that Addison was Hulk baby because she was so strong pulling away. And I was like, I guess so. She was in pain. It was hard. And my mom was there at the time. My mom was freaking out because like you could hear her crying like from the other end of the hospital. But yeah, so like once they were done, we came back in, and I'll add to that, that we came back in and the PICC line was done. It was in her neck up here. And that one, they explained to us, was like way more sensitive and stuff, so like we weren't able to like hold her as much. We still were able to hold her, but like not as much, because it's like really small. Like the thing was like this small that was going in her neck, so it could like break really easy. Well, guess what? It did. The one that was supposed to be permanent again. So they decided they would try for another PICC line. And if they couldn't do it, they'd get another central line. So they told us not to feed her for 6 hours, because if they weren't able to get the PICC line, they would do the central line. So since they weren't able to do it, they had to schedule her for the surgery for the central line. So she ended up, not eating for 6 hours. She was up all night screaming because she was hungry. 6 hours turned into 8 hours, turned into 10 hours. It was 13 hours before they came in and tried to do the PICC line. They realized they weren't able to do it. So my baby went 13 hours without eating. And then they go to try to schedule the surgery for, very soon. They couldn't do it. The surgery was so backed up, and that was lower on the priority list compared to the other things that they had, so they weren't able to do it. So she went all that time screaming, hungry, for nothing. They couldn't do it. So we fed her, and then they said just not to feed her after, I think it was 12, because they were going to do the surgery at 8 that next morning. So they went in and did the central line. That one lasted the full time we were in there. So since it did go into her spinal cord, we had to stay in there a month. So it was a lot of just like sitting around. Like the doctors would come in at like 11 o'clock in the morning. And I say doctors, when they would come in, it was usually about 10 doctors in at once. And it always happened that they would come in right when I was going to pump. Sorry, my dog's barking again. So they would always come in when I was pumping. So they would walk in, and I'm just like, like all exposed, pumping. Most of the time they were pretty respectful, and like I would cover up, or like my husband would help me cover up. So they would come in and they'd say everything that was wrong with her, like why she was there, how she was doing, how much she peed, like everything. We had to write everything down. Like the whole time we had to write down when she ate, When she would pee, we would have to put the diapers on top of the trash can because they would weigh it to see how much she peed to make sure she was having good input and output. Every time we changed her diaper, we'd have to put the time, whether it was pee, poop, or both. Every single time. Every day when she had the central line in and the PICC line, we had to bathe her in HIPAA. It was like a surgical solution just to keep it clean because everything was so sterile and had to be sterile. So that like every night when they would come and change the lines, it was like a sterile procedure. We'd have to, if we weren't asleep, which most of the time we were, if we weren't asleep though, we'd have to put on a mask because it was a sterile procedure. So we would do that. It was a lot of waiting, a lot of, just praying that she would be okay. We watched a lot of TV because there wasn't much else to do. She was a baby, a newborn baby, so she slept a lot. It was nice having like the nurses there, like when we were like first time parents and stuff. So it was like kind of nice having the nurses there to ask questions to though, because like every little thing, like we would call them, like when her umbilical cord thing fell out, like we were looking at it after and it just looked really weird. So we called the nurse to ask. She got cradle cap, which I also think was from the formula because the second we switched her back to breast milk, her cradle cap went away. But we didn't know what to do about it, so we called the nurse and she like told us what to do, and we ended up getting like a special shampoo or something for it, but it didn't work. So the only thing that worked was once we switched back to breastfeeding, she was good. So we ended up on Christmas Eve. It was like the 21 days or whatever was almost up. So they did another spinal tap on Christmas Eve to see if it was gone. So they did that spinal tap, and that following Thursday was the 3 days because it took 3 days to get it back. But we weren't sure if they were going to send it back on the third day or if we wouldn't know until like the fourth day. But I had to go back to the dermatologist for a follow-up, and so I had left, and when I was leaving, Raul called me and he said, guess what? And I was like, what? He's like, the doctors just came in, she doesn't have the HSV in her spinal cord anymore. That was the second most happiest time I've ever been in my life, because my baby didn't have this anymore. That meant we could go home. We were gone for a month, and my baby was healthy again. They explained to us that we would have to give her acyclovir by mouth for 6 months. We would have to have monthly blood work to make sure that all her organs were good, because like we had said before, the acyclovir could be really tough on her organs. They also explained that she could have developmental issues because of the HSV being in her spinal cord. So they set us up with a program called Early Steps, which is for kids that have developmental issues to be evaluated. So we called them for her to get evaluated. Well, when they came, they said she has no problem. She's ahead, if anything. And actually, with all her tests that they do at the doctor, like the questionnaires and stuff, they always say she's ahead. So she didn't have that issue, thank God. All her blood work ended up fine. She never had any problem with the blood work. So we ended up coming home December 31st. So it was New Year's Eve. We came home and we finally got to take our baby home. That was December 31st. I guess this video is kind of getting kind of long, so I'm going to cut it off here and I'll tell you what happened next. She had another issue, so I'll tell you guys what happened next after that. Please go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell notification that's next to the subscribe button so that you can see whenever I make a new video and post it. the liking the video. That's one of the best compliments you can give me. The subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. Thank y'all so much for all the outreach of last video, because I had a few people message me and send me comments and stuff saying how, you know, it really helped them to see like that other people I went through it. So please, if anyone has went through anything similar or even the exact thing, please let me know, because I really enjoy seeing those comments and messages. So thank you so much. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. Thanks. Bye, y'all.